So, in the deep south of the United States, nestled in 310 square miles of restricted pine forest and murky swamps in South Carolina, lies a place that was one of the most secret and dangerous places on the planet. Good evening, and welcome to the Perseverance Mindset Podcast. You heard that correctly. This is the Savannah River site, a sprawling industrial complex built for a single terrifying purpose: to mass produce the core components for thousands of nuclear weapons. Yes, the N-word, nuclear. For decades, it churned out the fuel for an apocalypse that thankfully never came. But that work left a scar on the land and a hidden legacy of contamination buried beneath the surface. Most of the time, this legacy is invisible, tracked only by scientists and contained behind fences and warning signs. But in the summer of 2025, that invisible threat took a startling and tangible form. Workers conducting routine safety sweeps made a discovery that sounds like it was ripped from the pages of a 1950s science fiction comic book. It wasn't a leak, it wasn't a malfunction, or a secret experiment. For all the science lovers out there, it was a living, buzzing colony, a nest built by insects that was pulsing with levels of radiation. You guessed it, you're building nuclear weapons, you're going to have radiation. And with this radiation came a defying belief that this is the story of how the toxic ghost of the Cold War gave birth to a nest of atomic wasps. So, along the borders of the Savannah River site, there are creeks and ponds and everything else you could imagine, where signs warn the public against fishing. The fish in these waters can be radioactive, having absorbed contaminants that leaked into the ecosystem over half of a century ago. But the most bizarre and unsettling discovery here isn't lurking in the water. This isn't no three-eyed fish. It wasn't a mutated fish or a glowing frog. It was found near the massive buried tanks that hold the site's most dangerous liquid waste. It was a colonial organism that had meticulously built its home from radioactive mud, fed on radioactive insects, and in doing so created a structure itself concentrated a piece of nuclear waste. It was a wasp's nest. You know those pesky things in the summertime that are either built in the sections of our house or just annoying us and hopefully not stinging us. Had that experience as a child, wouldn't recommend it. Now, within this unseen danger, a biological anomaly born from the atomic age, its existence is not a freak accident of nature. We're not talking about Ninja Turtles. We're talking about wasps here. But a direct and chilling consequence of the Cold War's most hazardous work. To understand how a simple insect nest could become radioactive hotspot, you have to first understand the place that created it. A factory designed to build the end of humanity. Perseverance pioneers, welcome back to the Perseverance Mindset Podcast, recorded live here from our famous Dialogue Den, where mindset meets mission, and that mission drives momentum. We're so glad that you're with us this evening. So let's get into it. To grasp the scale of the Savannah River site, you have to picture the dawn of the 90s, right? The Cold War wasn't just a chill. It was a deep and terrifying freeze of what could happen next. The Soviet Union had its own atomic bomb, and a wave of panic crippled America. It was gripping it everywhere. And the race was on. Not just to build more bombs, but to build bigger and more powerful ones, and an unrelenting quest to do that, never-ending quest. To do that, the United States needed a dedicated factory, a place out there where the next generation of thermonuclear weapons, plutonium, and those ingredients needed to be tested, produced, and all of that. So in 1950, the U.S. government quietly acquired a massive tract of land in South Carolina, an area larger than the city of Chicago, if you could believe that. Entire towns like Allentown and Dunbarton were evacuated. Over 6,000 residents were told to leave their homes, leave their farms, and all of their history, all in the name of national security. Pretty crazy when you think about it. In their place arose a colossal industry city built with built with breathtaking speed. This was the Savannah River site. At least its heart were five massive nuclear reactors, not one, not two, five, not for generating electricity to serve the residents, but for war. Their sole purpose was to irradiate uranium targets, creating two new materials. The first was plutonium, the dense metal that forms the trigger of a nuclear bomb. Second was, probably won't get this right, but the second was tritium, a radioactive form of hydrogen that dramatically boosts a bomb's explosive power. Can't produce a nuclear weapon without it. For decades, the site produced virtually all of the nation's tritium and about 36 metric tons of plutonium, roughly a third of the total U.S. supply. So the whole site itself it had its own little world. Giant processing plants called cannons, because of their immense size, use remote control to separate precious materials from intensely radioactive fuel rods. The site had its own heavy water plants, waste management facilities, and tens of thousands of workers, all sworn to secrecy. And for decades, the Savannah River site was the beating heart of America's nuclear deterrent. But every gram of plutonium it created came at a staggering environmental price, a price left buried in the soil. We're going to get into that here. Making the elements of an atomic destruction device, an atomic bomb, is not a clean process. It's one of the dirtiest and most hazardous industrial processes ever conceived. For every plutonium pit that left the Savannah River site, an enormous volume of unbelievably toxic waste was left behind. This wasn't just any industrial byproduct. This isn't pouring out a container of Dawn or bleach. It was a witch's brew of material so dangerous they'll remain a threat for thousands and thousands of years. If you know, batteries just don't get up and disappear. They don't just disintegrate. They don't break down. Batteries left on the side of the road or in the environment, it's there for almost ever because it just doesn't break down. So the problem started in the separation cannons. After the fuel rods were irradiated, they were dissolved in powerful acids to extract the plutonium. What remained in that was foul, intensely radioactive liquid. This sludge was a cocktail of fission products containing isotopes like cesium-137 and strontium-90. These elements are so insidious because they mimic elements our bodies use, and it behaves like potassium, essential for muscles, while strontium behaves like calcium, the building block of bones. When they get into an ecosystem, they are taken up by plants, eaten by insects, and climb the food chain. They're not just something that's left. They materialize. They overtake the ecosystem, eradicating life from within. Basically, anything it touches just destroys. So over its decades of operation, the Savannah River site generated around, would say, 165 million gallons of this liquid nuclear waste. To try and store this atomic poison, the government built enormous underground tanks. So I know that you're already looking at this and be like, oh, this isn't going to work out well. Well, it didn't. So we're going to talk about that. So today, 43 of these aging steel and concrete behemoths still sit below the soil, holding about 34 million gallons of this hazardous waste. These tanks were never a permanent solution. They're getting old, and the waste inside them is dynamic. It's a chemical soup, and the containers are rotting. So what do you think that's going to spell? So radioactive decay generates so much heat that it can make the liquid boil underground. But the tanks are only part of the problem. In the early days, waste sometimes dumped into unlined pits, spills, and leaks over 50 years resulted in legacy contamination. The soil, the groundwater, the mud, and the wetlands all became infused with these radioactive particles, basically. The site became perfect, if unintentional, laboratory. The ingredients were all there, simmering for decades and decades. All that was needed was for some unsuspecting organism to come along and make use of them. So the date was July 3rd, 2025. For the environmental monitoring teams at the Savannah River site, it was just another day on the job, another day of routine radiation surveys near the tank farms. Their job is to walk prescribed routes with sensitive, counters, basically measuring methodologically, like scanning for any site of a leak. It's a slow and unusually uneventful job. But on this day, one worker passed a particular spot. Their equipment suddenly screamed to life. It was a radiation reading that wasn't just high, it was off the charts. The immediate fear is that always a leak from one of these buried tanks, an emergency response was triggered, and the specialists were called in to find the source. As they cautiously homed in on the signal, they didn't find a contaminated patch of soil or an old piece of equipment. The source of the intense radiation wasn't coming from the ground. It was a structure. It was a small grayish cone-shaped object attached to some infrastructure near the tanks. This structure was a wasp nest. You've heard me correctly. A radioactive wasp nest, emitting radiation at levels 10 times higher than the federal safety limit, you heard me correctly, for a person for an entire year. The nest itself had become a concentrated source of radiation. This isn't something out of a comic book. This just happened. The discovery sent a ripple of shock and concern through the site's management and Department of Energy. The nest was a radiological hazard. It was carefully sprayed with insecticide. These wasps are radioactive. I hope that's going to take care of the problem. But they were basically sprayed with this insecticide, delicately removed and bagged for disposal just like any other piece of radioactive waste. But the stunning discovery left a mystery. No wasps were found in the nest. Had they abandoned it? Or did the colony perish, leaving only its atomic tombstone behind? So from this leak, these wasps built this nest. This nest became radioactive. These wasps either chose another place to live or just eradicated them, just killed them off. So the official investigator concluded there was no new leak. The source was the legacy material in the environment from the result of the waste. The wasp was likely a species of mud dauber, had simply gathered the materials from their immediate surroundings, mud, from the contaminated soil and wood fibers that are around, from radioactive plants. They had this unwitting collected thousands of microscopic radioactive particles and concentrated them into their home. So we're talking about something that can be hazardous to your health, basically detrimental to the ecosystem it's in. And these wasps just use it as part of their home, part of their structure to build. And the wasps weren't movie monsters. They were just master builders like they are in everyday life, using the toxic earth that was created through these tests and through these sites as their construction supply. So this story is a stark reminder of the long shadow cast by our nuclear and Cold War age, where the consequences of our past can surface in the most unprecedented ways. So radioactive wasps. Now, it's interesting. The atomic wasps of the Savannah River, that's what calling them today. The atomic wasps are not just a scientific. This isn't just about scientific curiosity. They are a warning written by nature itself. If you find these hidden histories and the complex relationship between technology and the environment truly fascinating, make sure to hit that notification bell below. Be sure to follow our channel. Be sure to keep updated with all of our updates in the Dialogue Den. You won't want to miss our next investigation into the unintended consequences of human power. So what's the takeaway from the strange tale of the radioactive wasp's nest? And again, this isn't a comic. We're not making this up. This isn't odd news. This is real. The Department of Energy was quick to say that the nest posed no danger to the public. It was found deep within the secure 310 square mile site. They reiterated that the contamination was from old sources, not a new leak. And since the wasps didn't travel far, Any contamination would be localized from a public safety standpoint. And they're correct. The incident was contained, but focusing only on the immediate danger misses the larger point totally. The atomic wasps are a powerful symbol. They're a biological demonstration that when you create materials that stay dangerous for thousands of years, you can't ever fully control them. You can bury waste in steel tanks and fence off the land, but you can't command nature to obey your boundaries. The radioactive particles didn't stay put. They migrated into the soil, the water, and into the very cells of the plants and trees growing there. Hence, radioactive wasps. The ecosystem didn't reject the contamination, it incorporated it. The wasps are perfect. Darkly ironic illustration of this is one could even speculate that the toxic landscape may have been even beneficial to the wasps. The steady heat generated by the decaying waste in the underground tanks warms the surrounding soil, right? Which could create a more stable microclimate for an insect colony. The contaminated area that sickens other animals might have even provided the wasps with a safe predator-free zone. So these wasps, they took advantage of building a stable home, building a stable ecosystem for themselves. The place designed to create weapons to destroy the world may have unintentionally become a sanctuary for these insects, for these radioactive wasps. They didn't just survive in a toxic environment. They might have thrived because of it, because using our poison as their shield and our waste as their bricks for their home. This incident forces us to confront some, like, what we think about nuclear legacy really means. Not just about managing waste in tanks, it's about permanent contamination of the environment. So the story echoes what scientists have observed in other nuclear landscapes like Chernobyl, where long-term effects on wildfire are still a subject of intense study and debate. The radioactive wasp nest is smaller, but no less significant. It's an example of the same phenomenon because it highlights the basic hubris of the atomic age and the belief that we can fully contain the power we unleash. So the Savannah River site was built to master the atom and forge weapons of almost unimaginable power for the United States. For a time, it succeeded. But the story of the atomic wasp is a humbling epilogue to that era. It's a reminder that we are not the only force at work on this planet. We can build our reactors and cannons, and we leave behind a legacy of waste we think is securely buried. But we are only temporary custodians. In the end, nature endures, it recycles, it repurposes, and it adapts. It takes the shattered atoms of our weapon factories and uses them to home of an insect. The nest itself is gone, disposed as just another barrel of radioactive waste, but the warning it represents is still there. It continues to buzz, a faint. It's a signal from the past that is not as nearly buried or settled as we'd like to believe. It tells us that our most dangerous creations have a life of their own, and they will continue to interact with the world in ways we never intended and can truly never predict. So if you like the content in this episode today, please like and subscribe to our channel on Facebook, X, TikTok, YouTube as well. We'd love to have you as one of our perseverance pioneers. So until next time, this is John Zedzura signing off. Have a great night, everyone.